I am an African historian. I take no side in any present political matter. My purpose is simply to observe what happened in the past, and how does that relate to what we see today. In many places around the world, present events appear as consequences of earlier events. Some of those consequences were intended, others were not. But in either case, understanding the past helps explain the present. This narration focuses on the region, now known as South Africa. It is not a political statement. It is an educational reflection for those who wish to know where they come from, so that they may better consider where they are going. The name South Africa derives from the country's geographic location, the southern tip of the African continent. This name came into use during the era of European maritime exploration. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company, led by Jan van Riebeeck, established a replenishment station at the Cape of Good Hope. Enslaved people from East Africa and the East Indies were brought to the station. Over time, the station grew into a colony. The colony expanded northward. It brought Dutch language, Roman Dutch law, and new systems of land ownership. Before this period, the region had many names, given by its various indigenous inhabitants. The name South Africa emerged from the colonial context, not from local tradition. In 1795, the British took control of the Cape Colony. During the 1830s, a significant number of Dutch-speaking colonists moved inland. This movement is recorded as the Great Trek. The reasons included a desire for independence, access to land, and the continuation of slavery. The migrants established several republics: the Transvaal, also known as the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, the Orange Free State, and the Natalia Republic. These movements displaced some indigenous populations, including the Northern Ndebele and Zulu groups. They changed the demographics of the region. Historical records indicate that some African leaders became aware of the colonial presence at the Cape and at Delagoa Bay, present-day Maputo, where the Portuguese were active. Some leaders proposed uniting different African polities to strengthen their position relative to the incoming colonies. Other leaders chose not to unite, preferring to maintain their separate authority, and built alliance with the colonies. Conflicts occurred among African groups, and also between African groups and the Dutch-speaking migrants. The discovery of gold on the Witwatersrand increased competition between the Boer republics and the British Empire. In 1899, an ultimatum was issued by the Boer leadership, and war began. The British Empire prevailed in 1902. The Boer republics lost their independent status and were incorporated into the British Empire. However, the Dutch-speaking population maintained its cultural identity. In 1910, the Union of South Africa was formed. It united the Cape Colony, Natal, Transvaal, and Orange Free State into a single British dominion. The seat of government was Pretoria. Parliament sat in Cape Town. A Governor-General represented the British monarch. An executive council, headed by a prime minister, exercised effective power. The first prime minister was Louis Botha, a former Boer general. The Union government represented the white population, both Afrikaner and English-speaking communities. The native African population was not included in the political system. In response to their exclusion, educated African leaders formed an organization, originally called the South African Native National Congress, later renamed. This organization sought inclusion in the political system, the right to vote, the right to own land, and the right to be recognized as citizens within the Union. This marked a shift. Earlier African leaders had rejected colonial systems entirely. They sought to maintain separate indigenous governance structures. In 1961, South Africa became a republic. It ended its status as a British dominion. The apartheid system, formalized in 1948, continued. Under that system, Native Africans were required to carry identity documents at all times, known as pass laws. Without these documents, movement was restricted. Arrest could follow, and there was a deeper cost: the constant fear of being stopped, the humiliation of being asked to prove one's right to be in one's own land. Many who lived through that time speak of a persistent pain, a feeling of being a stranger in the place of their birth. Today, across many parts of Africa, a similar experience can be observed. African citizens from one country may be required to present passports and permits when moving to or through another African country. And sometimes, even with the correct documents, they face harassment, delays, demands for additional proof. The pain of being made to feel unwelcome by fellow Africans. It is not the same system, but the feeling may echo what came before. The confusion, the small humiliations, the question that quietly aches: why must I prove myself here? This narration does not compare systems of power. It only notes that the human experience of document-based control can carry a similar weight across different times and places. In 1994, following a period of negotiation, the country held its first elections. Elections in which the majority population was allowed to vote. A new government was formed. The system of legal racial exclusion ended. From a historical perspective, the 1994 transition granted the native population political power, but within the same territorial and legal framework, the framework that had been established during the colonial period. This was different from the goal of earlier African leaders, who had sought to preserve separate indigenous systems. Some outcomes of South Africa's history were intended by those who made decisions at the time. The establishment of the Union of South Africa in 1910, with a white-only electorate, that was intended by its creators. The formalization of apartheid in 1948, that was intended by the government of that period. The transition to non-racial democracy in 1994, that was intended by the negotiators involved. Other outcomes were not intended. The disunity among African polities in the 19th century, that was not a coordinated plan. It was the result of many separate decisions. This disunity created an opportunity for colonial powers. They could apply a strategy often called divide and rule, by supporting one group against another, by making treaties with some leaders while opposing others. The colonies did not need to defeat all African polities at once. They only needed to prevent them from uniting. This pattern is recorded in many parts of the continent, not only in the South. The persistence of certain economic and legal structures, from the colonial era into the post-1994 period, that was not necessarily planned by any single group. It emerged from historical circumstances. Many present-day conditions in South Africa, including land distribution, urban geography, legal frameworks, and economic patterns, can be traced to decisions and events that occurred before 1994, and in some cases before 1910. Knowing history does not determine what choices to make today, but it does provide context. Without understanding the formation of the country, its name, its borders, its laws, and its demographic movements. It is difficult to explain why the present looks the way it does. The young generation did not create the system they inherited. However, understanding that system, how it came to be, who designed it, and who resisted it, may help each person see their own position more clearly. What they choose to do with that understanding is for them alone to decide. This narration has no political agenda. It offers no solution. It simply states the past is present, and those who know where they come from are better equipped to choose where they go, not for anyone else, but for themselves. The past is never dead. It is not even past.